today because I bring a message of concern, but also an exciting message of hope. And along the way, I want to talk with you about some specific things that have been happening on behalf of some work that's being done here in Colombia that's really exciting. And it is my great pleasure to describe it in some detail to you. So, this is not just some run-of-the-mill inspirational seminar. This is specific. We're going to get into the truth of the matter, and we're going to examine possible solutions. So the title of this is Activating a New Generation of Leaders in Colombia, a Transmedia Approach. Okay? I have customized this presentation to Heroes Fest on behalf of Impulsa and Out of the Blue, Starlight Runner, and everyone who has been working so hard on this project. First, let's talk about heroism. You've heard this again and again, the definition of hero and so forth. I have been working in Hollywood. I know a little bit about the Hollywood definition of hero, but I also know it based on literature and based on comic books and based on history. It strikes me in this context that a hero is someone who breaks free from the limits imposed on him or her by society and imposed on him or her by their past experiences. Okay? That's going to come back and haunt us later. A little bit about me. I was born in New York City in the early 1960s under very non-heroic circumstances. My mom was very, very young, 15 years old. My dad was Puerto Rican, and he was not happy with his relocation, his immigration from Puerto Rico to America. There he is, Papi, Jose Antonio Gómez. He was everything that as a small child I was not. When I was born, I had a paralysis in my face from the delivery by forceps. So when I smiled, it was a crooked smile. He was very handsome, easy with the ladies, and he loved bailando y deportes, baloncesto superior. I like Godzilla, cartoons, fairy tales, dinosaurios. We were two very, very different human beings, and sometimes I thought that he looked at me and he didn't like what he saw. One day, he said, "Jeff, come here." And he asked me to sit down on the sofa in front of the television. He never did that. So I was happy, I was excited. He showed me something called lucha libre, Mexican wrestling. And I was like, oh, well, this is kind of interesting. The characters were big, superhero-looking guys. They wore masks. The battles were exciting. Sometimes there was a little sangre, which I got scared. But I stayed. I stayed there, and lucha libre created a tiny connection between myself and my papi. So I loved it. One day in a bodega, he bought me a comic book that looked a lot like that one, El Santo. And that was interesting to me because El Santo was in the lucha libre, he was fighting, but also he could be a superhero in a comic book and battle La Momia and Los Vampiros and things like that. It was awesome. It was really, really interesting that this character appeared in a different medium. Then I noticed on the Spanish language channel on television, El Santo existed in movies. And it was fascinating to me because it meant that the world of lucha libre had expanded to include multiple media platforms. It was like a universe where the character behaved in slightly different ways on different media, but it was the same character. It was El Santo. That was really intriguing to me. I began to think about what these worlds were like and what their potential was. And of course, I began to get deeper and deeper into these exciting fantasy worlds. Well, fantasy and reality have a way of colliding. In the projects, the most young boys were very different from me. They wanted to fight, they got in trouble, and they certainly had a wonderful time picking on me, bullying, sabe? It wasn't easy. What I started to learn how to do was to watch very carefully and listen very carefully every time I walked into a new space, a new room. And what I began to learn was that the bully felt anxious. The bully changed the whole room when the bully walked into the room. The people expected him to be bad, and so he became bad. What I did was a little bit different. I listened when the guy talked and noticed that he sometimes liked the same things I liked, and I began to kind of say a few things about the motorcycles or the snakes or the lucha libre, and I noticed that they were a little bit nicer to me. Sometimes they even protected me when other bullies attacked. Life was difficult. My father went away back to Puerto Rico in 1969. I was still very small. A part of me thought, well, maybe it's my fault. Maybe it's because I couldn't be the son that he wanted me to be. And I held that in my heart for a long, long time. I thought that I couldn't be good enough at anything if I couldn't be a good enough son to keep my father in the house. We also became very poor. Tenemos nada. Nada. There was, I played with plastic dinosaurs I found in the street. It was very hard for my mom, but she struggled, and she got me into a public college, Queens College, City University of New York. And in that college, I discovered a world of literature and film. I became a film studies major. I loved the movies. And I began to teach myself about how to construct these worlds. I was not interested in being alone. I didn't want to be isolated. I wanted the stories that I worked on to connect with many people. Remember, I liked Lucha Libre, which was on television, comic books, movies. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a multi-platform storyteller. At Queens College, I discovered a game called Dungeons and Dragons. Yes, I am a nerd. Geek. But what Dungeons and Dragons allowed me to do was to construct fantasy worlds, but in a way that put a little New York into it, a little popular sensibility. I wanted my friends to play in this game, and in order to do that, I had to put a little Pink Floyd into my fantasy world, a little heavy metal. And they enjoyed it. They enjoyed it so much, I created a very realistic world. There it is, Corridor. And I enjoyed that. I wanted to make a living in this entertainment world, but of course, I didn't have anything. I didn't know anyone. I became a school teacher instead. That's the school I taught in, UB Blake, PS 25, in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, one of the most rough and difficult neighborhoods in the whole city. And in order to control the kids, I would talk about their popular culture. It's the only way. And I was, I was still young, maybe 22 years old, so I talked about LL Cool J, He-Man, Thundercats, Voltron. The kids loved it, loved it, loved it. So I developed a popular culture curriculum to connect with dozens of kids and get them to comprehend story and to be able to write about the stories that they heard, even the hip-hop songs, where they could understand what the lyrics were talking about. Great comprehension. And what I learned was that stories produce a vivid simulation of reality. They give the audience the opportunity to enter fully into others' thoughts and feelings. And this has now been scientifically proven. Then, in the 1980s, I discovered something interesting. If you stuck a television on top of a typewriter and connected it to your phone line, you had a doorway to another universe. And I learned as much as I could about not so much computer programming, but about telling stories through the computer that other people on the other side of the computer can join in the narrative. And this, to me, made it possible for me to transcend my limitations and begin to work on projects that would connect people across multiple media platforms. So in today's interconnected world, what I was anticipating was that attention would flow from one screen to the other, okay? And then we wouldn't even think about it. We would take out our phone, look at the television, check out the monitor in the bar, whatever, and that would be the way the future would be. And as the future started coming, began to arrive, I thought there was a problem because people were not designing the content to flow the way that our eyes and our attention spans were flowing, okay? There was no design sensibility to the way that the communication was playing out across multiple media platforms. So I started a company. I practiced multi-platform storytelling in the 1990s with video games for the Nintendo platform, and comic books for Valiant Comics. They were very successful because I used the web as a component in the story. And the web allowed my audience to speak directly to me, and for me, while I was creating the work, to listen to the audience the way that I had listened to the bullies at school and integrate their interests and their voices into the work. What if you could build a model that does this on a regular basis? You would create immense loyalty and connection with your audience. Starlight Runner Entertainment was built to create these multi-platform stories. And over the past 14 years, we became really, really good at it. We have become the world's leading creator and producer of transmedia franchises. What we do is we maximize the value of intellectual properties by preparing them so that they move across multiple media platforms. They didn't repeat. There were different aspects of the story on different platforms. And we began to do this for television, video games, movies, corporations, everything. Our clients began to rack up wonderfully. It's amazing to me even to look at this list: Coca-Cola, 20th Century Fox, Disney, Mattel, Hasbro. Amazing. How do we do this? It's about listening, okay? It's all those things, but it really is about listening, because we need to determine the essence of the message. Because when communication breaks down, where the message fails, is when different people are building different aspects of the story in different media, but they're not talking to each other. It collapses, it falls apart. By understanding the essence of the message and making sure it is in each media platform, we can align the stakeholders. Everybody can agree on the message, and then we can build a roadmap to extend the message across multiple media platforms. So, transmedia storytelling is a tool. It is a technique of storytelling. It is the process of conveying messages, themes, or storylines to a mass audience through the artful and well-planned use of multiple media platforms. Okay? When you do this, if you do it well, the life cycle of your product or your message, your television show, your movie, it becomes longer. The creative content stays around longer. Okay? So in the old school, you had your movie, it was successful, then you created a book or ebook, and it was okay. And then the video game of your movie, it sucked. And so the whole experience of the story world, it's okay. It starts out good, and then it gets bad. With transmedia, the key here is the creation of the content in such a way that it simulates reality. It makes it seem as if the world is real. And so you are creating like puzzle pieces that even if they come out of order, if you fit them together in your mind, it's smooth, it works. And when it works, it means that the storyteller is listening to you. The storyteller cares what you think. And that's beautiful. That makes you excited. That makes you want to invite your friends to join you in sharing the experience. Okay? So think about some properties over the past few decades that have done this well. Of course, there is Star Wars, because there's different types of content on different media platforms, but altogether it feels like a story world, the Star Wars story world. Think of it this way. Each media platform is like a musical instrument. The television is the piano. Your mobile phone is the violin. Your computer is the drums. Okay? You can make beautiful music with each one of these individual platforms. I'm saying we are not replacing them, we are bringing them together in one orchestral narrative, a narrative symphony. You can create new art, something new and beautiful, with the layered combination of narrative. Okay? Again, old school, your intellectual property was being designed for one medium. And then if it was successful, we thought about maybe bringing it to other media. In the new school, we are creating the intellectual property, the message, the story world, and then we are extending aspects of it out to different media platforms so that it plays to the strength of each media platform. Well, we were very fortunate because the big movie studios were investing more and more money into these giant movies like Pirates of the Caribbean, but the returns on just the film were not enough to cover the cost. These things had to last longer, and DVD sales were going down. So how do you make Pirates of the Caribbean worth more money? Well, you extend the property to different media platforms, but they didn't understand how to do this successfully. They came to Starlight Runner because we had had success with Hot Wheels from Mattel and because of my reputation with video games. And they said, can you make us understand pirates in such a way that the ancillary content, the transmedia content, can be more successful? And I said, yes, well, you need to understand Captain Jack Sparrow, and very few people did. And you need to understand that the story world is more important than the movie stars. Okay? Story world, more important than the movie stars. And of course, it was very successful. Pirates of the Caribbean went on to make billions of dollars as a multi-platform franchise. It drew the attention of James Cameron. And this is the first major point, people. You can come from nothing, from nowhere, and somehow find yourself on the set of the biggest movie of all time, standing next to the greatest director, the director of the most popular movies of all time, James Cameron. That's what happened to me, because he said, come to the set and spend time while we're shooting this, and you will understand the essence of my message, and you can infuse that essence into the products. Not just the products that are coming out right away, but all of the products as Avatar 2, 3, 4, Disney Avatar, all kinds of products and projects emerge out of the story world. Amazing, amazing. Halo, working with Microsoft to make Master Chief more human and to make people have better access to the story of a man with no soul who has to gain a soul in order to stop a massive intergalactic war. Men in Black, helping Sony extend that franchise across multiple media platforms. We used all of our research, our whole team. Steele Philippek was here, who is going to be giving a workshop in an hour or so, helped to put together the Men in Black mythology. This thing weighs 20 pounds, that book. It's big. And it contains all of the information about the Men in Black organization, the characters, but most importantly, the messages and themes of Men in Black, so that future movies, they don't even have to star Will Smith, because they'll be so compelling and so interesting, the universe can continue. Finally, Spider-Man, working on Sony Pictures' Amazing Spider-Man franchise, helping to expand it across all kinds of story worlds. So, we have entered a time where communication is ubiquitous. All right? We live amongst a generation of hyper-connected individuals, and that's just as appropriate here in Colombia as it is in New York City. Believe me, every restaurant I go to, everybody is like... the challenge that we face is that that's not going away, okay? How do we navigate the chaos? How do we surf across this ocean of pervasive communication? Well, advances in technology allow us to have a dialogue, okay? So we build loyalty in our brand by making sure that that dialogue is included, okay? And we use transmedia storytelling techniques. So it's not just movies and video games and television that this applies to. We also have worked with some very interesting and some very large companies to extend their messages across multiple media platforms, okay? But that's not the focus of today. The focus of today is Colombia and leadership. How does transmedia with Avatar and Marvel superheroes, what does that have to do with the future of you, my audience, and the people of Colombia? Well, to me, remember, I played games in order to build story worlds, but also to rehearse, okay? To experiment with how to communicate in front of many people, to experiment with how to deal with complex issues in ways that many people could have access to, and so that a dialogue can happen. All right? So that's what transmedia is with the entertainment industry, rehearsal, okay? So we did good in the rehearsal, and that's fine for the entertainment industry, but we need something more. Stories can affect change, people, all right? These are not the stories that are being told to us, but the stories that we share. Let's talk a little bit about how story can actually shift the dialogue in society, all right? In the early 1970s, at a time when people were fighting about race, the blacks and the whites, this divide was still deep, and television in the United States never discussed such things. But there was a producer named Norman Lear who created a character named Archie Bunker. He was a bigot. He was like a racist. He didn't like black people. He didn't like foreigners coming into America. And he lived in Queens, New York. And that was going to be a very, very difficult show to get on the air. What Norman Lear did was hire a woman who was familiar with these issues to help him balance the dialogue so that he a villain under any other circumstances. So when it was funny and you kind of liked the guy and started to understand what the argument was about, it gave permission for people to start talking about race. And that was a major shift. There became more and more television shows about these kinds of issues, and that precipitated a change in the United States that led all the way to the election of Barack Obama as president. There was then Simplemente Maria. Oops, there's a... So, I'm sorry, if we see something all around us, if it's on television and we're talking about it, it becomes real. Something that we weren't talking about before becomes real to us now because the media almost, if you handle it right, can give us permission to talk about it. The novela Simplemente Maria, which has been remade several times across all of South America, was fascinating because it was the story of a farm girl who was swept off her feet by a dashing city man who took her to the city because she thought she would marry him. Instead, she is left with a child and he abandons her. She has to find work and becomes a home worker, a maid. She is immediately abused. Back then, many home workers, domestic workers, were horribly abused by their employers. It's something that nobody talked about, but everybody knew about it. Here, on television, in a novela, we were seeing the truth that nobody was speaking about. It created an outcry because suddenly everybody could talk about this. And the laws in South and Central America slowly became changed to protect domestic workers. Amazing. The other thing about Simplemente Maria was to solve her problem, Maria studied. She went to night school. She studied at night, and she gained the education that would allow for her to be independent. Suddenly, women across South America and Central America, they were doing the same thing. Amazing. It led to the women's movement a few years after the movement started in the United States, where women started to become more independent and started to go to work, and it was remarkable. This project anticipated what we call the Sabido method, created by Miguel Sabido for Televisa in the early 1970s, where you're putting socially relevant issues into popular entertainment like novelas or radio shows. So when enough people share a concept, they will act. It is an energizing experience to see something and then collectively start to talk and then take action. In 2008, a 16-year-old boy made fun of a police officer. Somehow, a gun was pulled and the boy was shot dead. This, unfortunately, happened a lot in Greece. But this was the first time that a bunch of people had mobile phones and took pictures. And then suddenly, it got on Facebook, and within 24 hours, thousands of people were marching in the streets in protest of police brutality. It precipitated riots. They posted videos on YouTube, and neighboring countries got into it and began to protest on behalf of the Greeks. There were even a group of Greeks who took over a newscast in an actual TV station, and they talked about their issues. This was spontaneously a multi-platform protest, a multi-platform communication that was deeply effective because eventually Greek Parliament relented and pledged to impose restrictions on police power. And after that, at least for the time being, incidents of police brutality dropped. So when we retell a story, it becomes our own. I met an Egyptian academic, a professor from Egypt, not long after the beginning of the Arab Spring. I said, isn't it amazing how Facebook and Twitter is helping these people fight for their freedom by the hundreds of thousands, and how that's moving across all these countries? He said, well, you know, Facebook and Twitter, they are not exactly what triggered this. They were tools we used. The true tipping point happened earlier when our parliament retained their power without telling us a story. It was fraud, it was corruption, it was thievery, but they didn't make up a story to placate us, to make us feel like, oh, well, I guess it's possible that they didn't do those things or whatever. They stopped explaining what they did, and they just were awful. And so the difference this time is that they didn't even bother to lie to us about it. They didn't even tell us a story. When they stopped telling the story, the people rose up in protest. And when enough people act, things can change. And you might say the Arab Spring wasn't entirely successful, but in my experience, these things are iterative and will continue to erode against extremism and against tyranny. So, what if you can take these things which happen spontaneously and help them move more quickly, help to shape messages in a positive way that can get people to rise up and stand for themselves and be empowered and help themselves. By infusing story with the values derived from the common cultural mythology, you can capture the imagination of a people and you can fire it. Okay? We now have the technology and methodology to empower storytellers within these embattled, oppressed, or isolated cultures to voice their stories across traditional and digital media platforms. Okay? And when this happens, it provokes discussion, realization, education, and action. And it can bring the struggles of these people to the attention of the rest of the world. This is not about asserting United States narrative on others, okay? Other countries. This almost never works. We try a lot. Almost never works. This is not about propaganda or providing counter-narratives, direct counter-narratives to an argument. Because often the people that you are arguing against are extremists. Sometimes they're truly criminally insane, okay? You don't argue with people like that. You have to turn your attention to the population, all right? And so this is about connecting or reconnecting local storytellers with the foundational mythologies of their people, the values that espouse the preservation of life, the seeking of knowledge, and the hunger for freedom that is common to virtually every human being. This is about empowering those storytellers to leverage traditional and digital platforms to communicate these narratives, to enlighten, to inspire, and to call to action. It is so strange one day I'm working on Avatar, and the next day I am dealing with Mexico. Mexico has, as you know, a deep problem with corruption, with organized crime. We worked with both the United States government and a community of interest in Mexico to understand why this was happening, why the rise so steep over the last a couple of decades, and what narratives might be able to be used to inspire people to stop this violence, to stop tacitly cooperating with the organized crime, because organized crime needs your cooperation in order to proliferate. That investigation was extremely powerful. It yielded some potential solutions, and I'm crossing my fingers that the violence and corruption will diminish, but it was also proof that what we're talking about can be effective. Starlight Runner has done this elsewhere in the world, in the United Kingdom, in Italy. We're doing one now in Canada, but perhaps the most fascinating work is right here, activating a new generation of leaders in Colombia. Okay? So after years of peace, a pretty decent higher education system, a thriving national technological infrastructure, and a positive mood among the youth. You guys, you party, man. I've seen you. Why are there so few young adult leaders and entrepreneurs? If this continues, if there aren't more, in the near future, Colombia will be in danger of falling behind as a nation and will no longer be competitive on the international stage. So, what are the initial attitudes that the team that I joined, which was not just Starlight Runner, there were many parties involved. What are the attitudes that we saw that were assumptions about the rising youth culture in Colombia? Well, we learned that some people felt that Colombians are small-minded. They don't think about the benefits of big ideas and risk. Colombians are social and love to party, as I said, especially in the past decade, so there's no need to work hard. You know, we're enjoying ourselves, so what the hell? Colombians look up to cultural heroes, we learned this from the data, who are soccer stars, beauty queens, or outlaws. Those three things, it's very difficult to become them successfully. Colombians become jealous of those who are successful and seek to pull them down. They ridicule or malign one another if they achieve a modicum of success. This is what the attitudes were. I didn't necessarily believe all of this going in, but this is what we had to deal with. So, my company has formed a 9-step process to actually achieve population activation. And we will go through them right now for the first time. And for the first time, I'm going to show you what the results of some of these steps were with regard to the Colombian people. Because this is happening, people. It's happening right now. Number one, vision and the situational assessment. We begin with a crisis, all right? And this is a crisis, the lack of leadership and entrepreneurialism in Colombia. And we envision an idealized solution that might be of benefit to the majority of the population, not just youth, everyone in Colombia. We then study the root causes of this crisis, as well as the population's varied social, behavioral, and mediated response to it. Mediated means what the media is saying about the crisis. All right? We came up with this vision, this kind of perfect vision for what things can be. Social transformation, where thousands will take leadership positions in society, starting businesses and contributing in ways that will be of benefit to all. Okay? It's not the definitive solution, but it is kind of a direction that we can all head. That's the vision. Next, we had to capture data. And we did this particularly with a concept called micro-narratives, where Colombians actually spoke from their hearts and told stories with some guidance. David Snowden and Tony and his team at Cognitive Edge are involved in this. Okay, so it is vital to truly understand the crisis and its place in the daily lives of the people and determine what elements are interfering with their ability to respond effectively to the problem. We use a proprietary data capture method, including micro-narratives from a cross-section of the population. So, what was revealed from gleaning these stories, from actually sifting through all of this data? Well, we learned that the micro-narratives focused overwhelmingly on the present and future. The past was missing. That's weird. It's like there was a big hole in history. The concerns about daily survival, getting by, outweighed ambitions to seek the realization of personal dreams. All right? Well, I have dreams, but I got to eat. I got to work. So don't talk to me about entrepreneurialism. Lack of personal determination is the leading explanation for holding back. So these kids were honest. These people were honest. They said, you know what? I just don't want it badly enough. I am not determined enough. Okay? And also, the opposition of others played a strong factor in this, meaning peer group pressure or pressure coming from parents or the church, giving people the feeling that it actually might be better to just chill. Well, at the same time that we are gathering that data, we are also examining the cultural foundation, the emergent universal qualities that have shaped your culture over the past 30 or 40 years. All right? So we're talking with historians, with thought leaders, with academics, as well as various media resources to understand the greater cultural and historic context for this crisis. Okay? Patterns often emerge between this analysis and the population data, such as recurring trauma. Something bad happens cyclically in your culture. All right? The suppression of cultural strengths and values. In other words, the Colombians are great people. They are come from noble stock. There is a fantastic history to the Colombian people, but in recent decades, those aspects have been suppressed, often from outside forces. The imposition of artifice or extremes over liberty and progress. These are things like political schisms, organized crime, the biggest challenges, obviously, that Colombia has faced. Check this out, guys. Our friends at Out of the Blue created this amazing study of the history of Colombian popular culture. It has never been done at this level before. The results are astounding. Really, really fascinating. So, let's check it out. Colombian media in the 1980s, okay? This is when the media were first becoming truly popularized in this country, extending out into El Campo. And so we saw a lot of rural values, a lot of depictions of country living, and there was a religious element in the entertainment, okay? So Saint-Tropez was about a priest. Gabriel Garcia Marquez was talking about deep spiritual issues. The popular singer was the folk singer, okay? So this is a Colombia in the 1980s that is trying to galvanize its identity. There were clear parameters to what is and is not acceptable. They used traditional motifs in a new way because Colombia was in the process of modernizing. But there was an undercurrent of escapism to this. We weren't really talking about the issues that were coalescing around Colombia, the deep schisms, the true problems. In fact, as the cities were rising, they became suspect. They were not generators of story. In fact, entrepreneurs were villains. They were the bad guy. They were the guy who came to your town to try and make money, but wound up stealing from you. Look at the kind of prototypical attitude toward business and entrepreneurialism in Colombian media. 1990s. A lot of people smile when they see Jaime Garzón, a political comedian. It was a fascinating time in Colombian media because you had the growing stresses of the conflicts that Colombia was experiencing, but you had this kind of pushback in the media. No, you could not criticize the cartels or the politicians in any way in the media, except if you were funny, if you were a comedian. But even then, some people know about the fate of Jaime Garzón. On the plus side, you had an interesting kind of social ascendancy. Novelas like Yo Soy Betty la Fea and Café, the transition from rural to urban was beginning and was becoming acceptable. They were still a little cartoonish, a little surreal, but they edged closer to reality, okay? However, absolutely the case, the self and self-identity ruled over national identity. We did not talk about Colombia as a nation and the problems that it was facing. We avoided that overtly. Humor became a form of safe expression. We were pushing former boundaries, and there was urban mobility, and we used realism satirically, and sometimes were, unfortunately, punished for it. Well, the aughts. What happened to you people? What happened? Sin tetas? What the hell? I want my little girl to watch Sin tetas no hay paraíso. Fuck. Let's look at the patterns that emerged in the aughts. Because you know what was really happening was that Colombia was grappling with itself. It was trying to come to terms with horrible tragedy and deep conflict, okay? So at least you were talking about it. You were glamorizing it a little bit, guys. Dudes. So, there was self-examination and mockery, okay? But that was combined. It's almost as if in order to say the truth, you had to make a joke, okay? The content sometimes was darker, more unflinching, unyielding. But look at what's happening. The characters in these shows, okay? Even Pedro el Escamoso, who everybody seems to love, they gain through subversion, humor, sometimes criminal actions, outlaw actions, and of all things, luck. Luck, 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 luck. Okay? Suerte, is that what it's called? Luck. What's with that? It was about individualism versus group success. So you see things about the self versus the group, which are rooted all the way back in the 1980s, continue to propagate in Colombian media. Morality versus amorality. Hey, the only way to truly succeed in Colombia is to perpetrate a crime. Breaks my heart. This is a teenager saying this because of Escobar. And family values and religion win out over financial reward as if there must be a fight between the two. Okay? So can you see the patterns that emerge? You know, we're still having arguments with ourselves as Colombians from the 1980s, okay? When we were all in El Campo. It's time to move on, no? What we saw is not small-minded people. Colombians are not stupid. They're not foolish, okay? Colombians are traumatized, okay? We found something that we call tall poppy syndrome, okay? Tall poppy is the flower that grows higher than all the rest of the flowers. So what do? Snip, because you want even, right? Tall poppy syndrome. So why? Why is that? Because when there was severe civil conflict in Colombia, when there was cartels ruling our communities and cities here, if you became very successful, you were going to be drawn into this conflict. You were going to be jeopardized. You could be killed. You at least had to choose sides in a war. So of course your family, your friends, your church, and even the media are going to say, chill, don't do that. It's for your own good that you are not successful, that you keep your head low, all right? So if success has negative repercussions, there were not going to be positive role models for young men and women. They're missing. They're very few, okay? And by the way, these things have not gone away completely. Let's be honest, all right? They're still out there. They're in the background, but we know that in the hills around Medellin, these activities continue. And so, we remain a little bit scared. There is some veracity to what our parents and friends are telling us. So, how do we get over it? Because we have to, people. We have to move past this. We examine a set of themes, aspirational drivers, and archetypes. These are the fundamental elements of story that are going to get us to become brave and willing to make a stand collectively. Because if all of you become tall poppies, it is much harder to cut down everyone. All right? So we use story structure, epic story structure, to frame the individuals who comprise the population as heroes and must surmount the crisis. Okay? What story would you tell yourself to remind you of when you were at your ideal, in the face of such a crisis? What values drawn from your culture, your history, can solve this problem? What kind of characters are bigger than this problem? What traits will get the job done? We discovered that the fundamental trait in the Colombian soul is the creator. Okay? The creator has the potential to build and to make this country great, not just in the eyes of the world, but in the eyes of its own people. Letting go of the past and preconceptions, living adventurous and heroic lives, using the power of our diversity. We become masters, we become proud, we become brave because we are doing it together en masse. And when we do it en masse, no one can stop you. They don't have enough bullets. When we understand these themes and these fundamental story elements, we create a mythology, a blueprint for how we will proceed with the communication. All right? This is a guide that contains an overview of all of this information, a diagnosis of the crisis, and it offers a narrative-based solution to be implemented across a variety of digital and traditional media platforms. This document functions as an argument so that you can raise money, and a blueprint so that you can actually get the job done. Okay? You are not necessarily going to tell stories about the actual people and the actual situations. The best stories are metaphors that allow us to think about how we relate to something that is not exactly our situation. Our situation can be a little too on the nose, a little too depressing, a little too creepy. So we like seeing stories that are a little bit apart from ourselves. Okay? So these stories must reflect the themes, but also touch hearts. All right? So we ask ourselves about all of the content that is going into this communication to the Colombian people. Are the themes put into the stories, the narrative, the content, in accord with those basic to the project? What are the cultural touch points that are going into this aspect of the project? Is this project authentic? It has to be honest, inspiring, and positive. If it's just about punishment and negativity, it's going to turn people off. People will unplug. Next, we have to engage the visionaries so that there is cooperation and we get the job done, so that we find them because there are people who are negatively impacted by the problem, by the crisis. All right, so that's companies, institutions, talent, your movie and television stars, the media, and community leaders. Okay, this becomes a community of interest who have the money and the talent and the skills and the resources to extend the communication. Okay, and and also hopefully provide support systems, because it's not just story, it's public services. It is on-the-ground projects that help people to become leaders and entrepreneurs and things like that. Projects like Heroes Fest. All right, so while the core narrative must remain intact, it is the talent that is telling the story. They are co-creators, interpreting the campaign mythology as they wish. All right, so the idea is that I'm not telling the story to Colombia, Colombians are telling the story to Colombians. How does this benefit the community of interest? Well, they will have access to the data about the populations that purchase their products or patronize their institutions. They are furnishing inexpensive entertainment to people, and that always is a good thing to be associated with. They're affiliated with respected celebrities and creators, the cool people. There's prestige associated with being a patron of emerging art. There are new avenues of distribution for content, branded or sponsored, so it's a way to advertise their products. And they're improving the quality of life. I know that doesn't make that much money for them, but they're improving the quality of life. Almost done. The multi-platform narratives and social services. All right, so now we are producing the content that is going to be distributed across different media platforms. All right, because the Colombian people have access to content from an array of different media, the campaign narratives must be designed to leverage the strengths of different media platforms. Okay? So the narratives can be self-contained. They have a beginning, middle, and end, but combined, they are reinforcing the message. All right? Remember, the audience is becoming immersed in this. It gives them permission to talk, and then it gives them permission to act. So these messages ought not to contradict one another. All right? Simultaneously, we are implementing the social services to allow citizens to further empower and activate themselves. All right? So the logistics involved in this are maintaining clear goals, basic oversight. Somebody has to be kind of in charge. Clear communication between teams, and a project clearinghouse that is a producer or production team. We call them transmedia producers, who are keeping track of all of the communications as they are being implemented to make sure that there is clarity and coordination. Then we have to make sure that there is dialogue. We call it an architecture for dialogue, using technology to make sure that we are listening, because listening empowers people to speak. Okay? So the production process must always provide forums for feedback and, when possible, direct dialogue. Citizens must be encouraged to express themselves, tell their stories, and know that they are being heard. Efforts must be made to bring the people into the story. We call this weaving the people into the mythology, so that they see themselves in the fabric of the collective narrative, and they understand that their actions are making a difference, because when that happens, they will act more and more and more. All right? Finally, we make it happen. We implement. We determine what platforms they are. Sorry, guys, we're almost done. I promise. And a rollout strategy is designed before production commences. We then proceed with timetables, budgets, matching talent to the medium, sponsors, and method of distribution. All right? Sometimes we commission original content, but often the core message is integrated into established content, like a storyline into a novela. We capture the data because we are using technology to do this, and the technology is capable of absorbing the audience data. and then we modify the campaign as it's happening along the way. Okay, and then we are prepared to do it again after we've collected all of that data. How does this ultimately benefit the people of Colombia? Well, you are getting support for emerging leaders and entrepreneurs among you. There is direct support at a local level to develop communities of interest to support you guys. The support for the distribution of work to emerging leaders, meaning people are going to start getting jobs out of this. We're building relationships between companies, entrepreneurs, and communities. We're developing community organization. And finally, we are fostering development of a global community of engaged individuals because technology allows us to look beyond the borders of Colombia to make entrepreneurs and leaders part of the greater global society. People, dreams are paths between where we are and how we're thinking right now and what exists beyond our immediate, tangible, and psychological surroundings. You see what I'm saying? Each of us is in a prison formed by our past, by our expectations. Dreams are what we can use to pull ourselves out of that prison because dreams involve things that are beyond our scope of knowledge and our scope of experience. To complicate matters, though, society often manufactures dreams in the form of celebrity to which we can aspire, but only a fraction of us can achieve. How many of us are going to become a soccer star? Football. They are someone else's interpretation of what is real that is imposed on us. We deserve to have what we desire. Wealth is okay. Achievement is okay. Being the tall poppy is okay. We can acquire it heroically and to the benefit of all. That is possible. We have seen it happen. To do that, we must look beyond our perceived limitations and gaze at the limitless possibilities of the world. Look for mentors and stories that jar you out of that prison, that shake you, okay, out of your current existence. It might not be comfortable for you. The party may have to be just on the weekends. But like any great adventure, you will have a shot at living your life to the fullest and making the world a better place. And we create those worlds. Thank you very much. At Jeff_Gómez, Twitter, at Jeff_Gómez. And if you want further insight about any of this, go to the Starlight Runner Facebook page or email me, jeff@starlightrunner.com. I will respond to you. I'll do my best to help you because that is my debt to the beautiful people of Colombia. Thank you.